So hello everyone and welcome. Welcome to this Document Excellence Group Roundtable on accessibility tools. And thank you for joining wherever you are in the world. I'm looking forward to this. I know as we've started to plan this, finding out more about document accessibility, what it is, what we need to do to encourage it and who it actually benefits. As we've been finding out more, I just wanted to learn more as we're going. So I'm really looking forward to today. Today's session will be recorded, so if you don't want to put your webcam on, if you're self-conscious, then that's absolutely fine, but we do like to see your faces. Get it there. And we will post the recording on the website as soon as it's available. So for the next hour, we are going to be in the hands of Richard McDougall, Sherry Capel, and Julia Satov. Sherry, do you want to take it away?
Sure. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Sherry Capel. I'm an evangelist at Litera. And this whole thing, I want you all to know, it was really inspired by almost simultaneously receiving requests at Litera to make sure that our products had iconization that was accessible and was readable. And at the same time, Richard, who made this declaration, as he said, I'm looking ahead to the new year and I'm thinking, I don't want to have a resolution. I actually want to have a revolution. And for me, the thing I'm going to do in all my documents is I'm going to put in alternate text. And so these things came together to kind of form our roundtable discussion today. What we want to start with is the relationship between accessibility in, think of it as the digital realm, but that and the relationship with every one of our firm's DEI initiatives. And with that, that is why my colleague, Julia Satov, is joining us today. She is our Global Director of DEI initiatives at Litera. And so she's going to talk a little bit about that, the why of all of it. And then we're going to take a tour, think of it as the technical portion of the program. We're going to take a tour of the tools that have been honestly released and enhanced from both Microsoft Office, specifically 365 today, and then also where I first encountered the whole set of tools, which was in Adobe Acrobat. And these are not going to be deep dive training kinds of things. It's more to just kind of acquaint you with these tools. And we are then going to have an open discussion about a lot of different questions that this brings up for our group and what we're going to take as next actions. So the very first thing to kind of tee up Julia here is what is DEI? Right? We all know that it's abbreviation for diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I really pulled this out as the inclusion part. It means that everyone has the opportunity for success, including those with physical or cognitive challenges. And I just thought that was such a great encapsulation. But I know, Julia, you even have some additional insights for us. And so with that, we're going to start to queue up Julia and some of the questions that we have for her. Sure. So, Richard, you want to kick that off?
Yeah. Thank you, Sherry, and thank you for remembering at the beginning of the session here my story back in January that I wasn't going to have a New Year's resolution. I was going to have a New Year's revolution. And that was because I had sort of accidentally stumbled on alt text in my Microsoft Office projects. And I made a decision that every time I paste an image into an Office product, I get prompted to put in alt text. I'm going to define the alt text for every single image. I don't know how this will pan out in the future, but that's what I'm going to do. And so I have not stopped. My interest here focuses on the whole notion that we have made our workplaces accessible over the decades by widening entranceways, cutting ramps into our walkways, providing facilities that are accessibility to everybody. And previous to that, or simultaneously to that, we've opened up all our educational and career opportunities to women and underserved communities. And all of this is about using technology to make the world a better place for people. And so that made me think, how are we making our documents accessible? What features are we leveraging to make our document collection accessible? Are our human resources documents accessible? So that's sort of where I've gone off here. And having Julia participating has really opened it dramatically. And I know that Julia's going to talk a lot about inclusion. And I guess one of the things I want to hear from Julia is that we hear about the mission of those in your profession. So I'm talking too much. Why don't we move on to talking about inclusion from Julia?
Yeah. So would you just tell everyone, introduce yourself properly, Julia, and tell everyone what is the mission of the DEI professional?
Yes. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening. One is thank you so much for inviting me. This is always really exciting. This is a passion of mine. I always think about, just going back to Richard's comment, is my revolution was to lose the COVID 15 pounds, but we're still working on that. But I'm also, in addition, the revolution of DEI is constantly top of mind for me. I love the work that we do. I've worked across, it's been over 15 years, and I've worked across both private and public sectors, which I find quite interesting, what I bring in to some of the challenges and the evolution of diversity, equity, and inclusion, especially with accessibility. And I've also worked in various different industries, so finance, academia, legal, and now tech. So I'm going to give a little bit of a 10,000 view, but in terms of D&I, not speaking particularly, Tara will look at that in a second, but DEI, accessibility is incredibly important, but what I find is it does fall to the lower burner. It really does fall to the lower burner. Listen, I'm a no holds barred. That's the type of leader I am. And the struggle with this is, as we've turned into really remote work, but tech companies who were already hybrid and remote, if we think about it, and it was just their nature for it, is that we had opportunities there to hire with more accommodations without even knowing of it. For example, if you have travel or mobility issues, for example, you working from home because we had very little space or we were remote was something that was already addressed, but it still left it at the lower burner. And then we move into, this is the reality of work, and we're looking at, so where do we still need to make and move the dial on electronic curb cuts, is how I'd like to refer to it. So that's really starting the reality, right? I'm not like a rainbows all over the place about it. It's what's the reality, what's some great things we've done, and what does that look like for the next view? And so if we move to this next, and I've worked in corporate, and I never like to commodify the work that I do, but it is incredibly important to make the business case. And I just wrote about this in CIO Views, which was a really great article I wrote. And it was a good flex in terms of how do you make things very much important. So there's two things I'll talk a little bit about. It is, who is your audience that you need to be able to focus on? If you only have so many resources and so much time when you're looking at your D&I priorities, align it to a business mission. And I'll talk a little bit about that. That's how it becomes important. And one of the things that we lead with on one of our diversity resources that we created was this, which was, if you don't design for accessibility, it is like saying to every fifth person who walks in your door, your virtual door, I don't really want your business, because there is a lot that is unseen. I have a disability. I have a learning disability. It's the same thing that was passed on to my child. I don't require accommodation, but in my role as a director, I have much more power and privilege to be able to organize how I work. Think about it that way. Think about accessibility. Let it blow your mind when we think about diversity. Right? And thinking about, wow, I never thought about diverse learners. I talk really fast. So I use Teams Name Coach. I mean, sorry, I'm speaker coach. You talk too fast, you use too many acronyms. That's for learners and accessibility and diversity, right? If we think about it that way. Also, Microsoft just introduced, and one of my I have a lot of people who in my network that come to me and ask me either questions or sometimes they just want to grumph about this. But they said, listen, they've introduced, it's almost like this kind of political diversity, equity, and inclusion filter on what you write. And it says there are 3 or 4 phrases, like if you say, hey guys, that it will highlight for you and say, before you send that, this is not politically correct. So when we think about this, let us really blow your mind in terms of what diversity means, even before we get to the idea of inclusion. So I just wanted to start off there. Hope that's kind of exciting. I'm going to move on to the next one, if that's okay. One of the things that I do is inspire excitement. I think it's really incredibly important. We are in, as far as I'm concerned, the 5th industrial revolution. And if you know about the 4th industrial revolutions, right, 5th, and I champion this in a lot of speaking events, is the 5th industrial revolution is actually tech for innovation and human good, human social good, right? And that's where we are. I'm like, debatably, we're here. There's an expectation of that. And I spoke, I hope I get in for HildaCon, but I've applied. But talking about diversity as competitive intelligence is that brands have no other choice to be competitive, is to recognize their diverse population, not only their clients and what they're looking for in their value set, is talent and accommodating for our talent, right? And so here we are, and inspiring in tech, constantly tech for good. This is the industry you're in. Hopefully that inspires innovation. So if we're the ones who create the innovations, just like Trinidad said, right? Then we also need to be inspired consistently. And on the right-hand side is a little bit deeper of Litera's. So this is Litera's kind of stance. Accessibility is the concept of whether a product or service can be used by everyone. That's equity, however they encounter it. However they encounter it. At Litera, we are committed, and I'm reading this off purposely because, it's important. It's also small, right? And visual in that practice. So at Litera, we are committed to building a culture of inclusion for our employees, partners, and customers. It includes making sure that the content that we provide is accessible to all by designing an experience to meet everyone's needs. This is our value proposition as we are working towards. We are not there. We're not there. We're a highly acquisitive company. We have very new learners, and we're just getting our data cleaned up and on board with everybody we're supposed to in the right space. I'll never claim what we're not doing. We are ambitious, but I do not roll that way. We have created this was a particular resource. We designing for visual accessibility guidelines, which recommended for inclusive design practices for visibility. So I just wanted to put that here. And then I skipped down to who and why would we use this? The designing for visual accessibility guidelines should be used by all employees who are creating any written or visual communication for the purposes of, and it continues on, which is, I know, what we're going to dig down deep into. And we said, when we design for inclusion, we make it possible for all users to benefit. And so that was the intention of an example of where we stand, what we hope to do, and then the intention of just one resource as an example. But what I thought was really cool was always to inspire the rest of our organization, saying you are in right now the center of the universe, which is tech. It continues to champion social good. So this is not only the work you do in your roles, be inspired to be innovative, right? About who we're serving. So, and then the next one. And I'm going to stop it there. Does anybody have any comments or thoughts or, smart remarks or disagreements on anything as well? No, there's some big statements in there.
I guess for me, what this leads me to is, how do we do this?
Right.
What do we do? What steps do we take? What initiatives do we implement?
Right.
And you've obviously done this, so maybe you could share with us some of the initiatives that you've undertaken, notably around accessibility.
Sure. One of the things I think is, I'm just talking not only at Latera, but kind of right across the experience, is looking at, are you looking and working within a brick and mortar? So
Mhm.
looking at banks, right? And even though we've gone online quite a bit, you are serving 5 to even arguably 6 generations that are still in the workforce when we look at extended retirement. So we're looking at developed accessibility needs, which you didn't think about before. There's a reason why I'm putting this in here, and a generational culture that wants to go into the branches or the brick and mortars. So I don't know what industries I'm talking to right now, all of them, but consider that, because that still happens. I still want to go into the bank if I'm a little annoyed of something. I don't want to be on the phone, right? And that's my generation. I'm going to be 50 this year. And so thinking about your audience, so I've had that experience of what that looks like. Two things is that facilities often handles certain accommodations that are outside of the D&I priorities at times, but that doesn't mean it's not appropriate. The other thing is compliance also, and the training that happens. Have a line of sight to that, depending on what organization you're in terms of the brick and mortar or the physical locations. And then the other thing is making sure that compliance talks about how we treat people and how we accommodate for, and some of the expectations of that. Now, what those are is external look, and that's what I handle, is ensuring there's a line of sight of what do we have. So I may not be the expert in that, but is covering the bases of, is our company touching where our company and our customers are at. Now, if I move to some of the things that we've done online to remote, what we're looking at is, well, who are we serving? So I'm saying I need to have data on terms of who requires an accommodation, who even considers them having a disability at this time, right? Not even looking at what that disability is, and then working with your HR to be able to say, what data do I have to for what are the accommodations that are needed and required? And are we serving those? So when you ask me where I'm at, I'm looking at, let me just get a line of sight. If we don't know who we're serving, then sometimes we're putting all of our focus and our calories in different areas. I think what's incredibly important is what you're talking about today serves all. It serves all. So it's incredibly important to do it and not to be bogged down with if you don't have data on it. So that's the other thing that I want to say. This is what I do. The other thing I want to say is practice. Exactly what you said is, I'm going to do it anyway, but the practice of everyone doing it at the organization is quite a struggle. It is quite a struggle. So how do we get this as a have-to practice that's expected? Think about subscripts underneath. I never remember it because I don't have that need. But how do we have that practice in every event we have? Even Sherry probably knows, yeah, we don't have it in every event. How is that a practice? I'm the D&I leader. I should be saying that. These practices are incredibly hard. But if we continue to do it, then we can start to hold others accountable to do it in designing and looking at, well, who are we helping? So I know that may sound a bit complicated, but I think ensuring practice and consistency is one of the things that I hope for. So I kind of reached around.
Well, let's sort of pinpoint it. Let's make it a little more practical. You mentioned curb cuts earlier. We've all seen these physical manifestations of accessibility. What are the curb cuts in the digital realm?
Right. Oh, that's such a great question. One of the things is we've already seen an increase. If you look at the US numbers, in terms of accessibility, is more people with accessibilities are actually applying for jobs because there's not an expectation, not only of mobility, but bias. So we're actually having more candidates. We're a global company, but US often has very quick accessibility because we have guidelines that often trend statistics. I'm in Canada. And we're also covered very strict. UK, Canada, and the US have very strict laws and accommodations and expectations that fall within your charters of rights. So it also depends on the safety nets that you rely on, that you can say this is really appropriate, that it starts to become a culture of the workspace. But when we look at how people are stereotyped or biased or they feel, this is reduced. So we've actually seen that. But that means we're playing in a talent field that has accommodations that at times we may not know of. Our talent base has disabilities that are hidden. So why not just do it? Because we may be leaving or higher attrition. We don't have the data because people found it difficult for the other accommodations we didn't look for, which is why I go back to data. So you asked me pinpointing is we don't know sometimes unless we do the data, because more people with accommodations and needs are here. Invisible needs are in our talent base. So that's another thing. One of the things is creating a culture of psychological safety for them to be able to say, what do we need? What do we need? And so that's another thing is, can we just have accessibility to screen readers? So one of the things that we've done is in Name Coach, we've in Latera specifically, is we've pulled in something, and it's a vendor, fantastic vendor on Name Coach, and it was actually a global gap in terms of pronouncing people's names. And it was launched, right? And pronunciation is a different reason, but think about this one for all. We introduced it with the capability of for visual, so that there's an audio capability, because we know that there's a percentage when dealing both climates and remote, that if I use your name, which I have, right, you are 30% more likely to feel inclined and influenced by me. And it's not a means to an end, it's building client relationships. So I need to know your name. So we included we've got a vendor, and then I haven't even introduced it that way, but, and we also have in our Windows and machines, a narrator built in. For Macs, have a voiceover built in to be able to help and support. So what are the nuances that we need to put in that helps, even when people are not telling us they need help?
Yep.
So that's some of the things that we've done here. For example, I don't know if Sherry even knows that, because I haven't launched a couple of things that we've done yet in the background. And the reason why is I'm doing it off the side because there's other priorities that are taking visible, right? Priorities in D&I, that this often falls to the wayside in any organization.
Yeah. So Sherry, this might be a good transition into the actual technology that we're all using day to day.
Well, and I think really quick, I believe it was Kim Walton who, when we first introduced the fact that we were going to talk about this topic, she was asking, so, you know, where is it that we know certain colors are inaccessible, or certain font sizes, or again, techniques that we might use in documents? Where do we go for these kinds of standards? And these are just two of them that we wanted to pull up and just make sure you all knew they were there. Certainly the World Wide Web Consortium has had their web standards in place for many, many years, which have influenced also in the US, all of our government sites all follow a Section 508 compliance, which again makes certain that those with various impairments can consume what's been put on to the government sites. And these are just a couple of them. And then, you know, not that really it's a standard per se, but I will say that the tools that have been introduced into Microsoft Office 365, specifically what we're going to show are those tools in Outlook, PowerPoint, and Word. And so I don't know, Richard, were you going to share the Outlook one, or how did we want to do that? Yeah. Okay, cool.
And that was this was another thing I found quite by accident. So why don't I share my screen? Oh, I cannot share. Okay.
I did stop, so you
there
can
we go.
begin.
So here is my Outlook. You can see my Outlook calendar here. No?
Yes, we can.
Yeah.
You can. Okay, very good. So I have this Zoom meeting, and I open it up, and I received this sort of invitation on a regular basis, and it never really occurred to me that there might be a problem here. When I check accessibility, I find that this color that's being used, so I click on Zoom meeting and I click on these phone numbers, this color that's being used cannot be seen by people with visual challenges. Some people can see it, some people can't. And all this means is that really I should just be using a better color. Red is better, but really black is best. It dropped right off the list. As soon as I highlight this text and I turn it to automatic, it's no longer a problem for accessibility. So as soon as I get rid of that very fancy color, my invitation is now completely accessible. And I don't think, I mean, for me, I never thought about that. And I don't know how many of us do.
So this would be the Zoom meeting invitation you're sending out
Yep.
to clients.
Yep.
Understood.
And I've received some that have, you know, light red or orange colors, and they're not accessible friendly. They're not accessible colors. So I wonder how many of us encounter that on a daily basis. I'm going to stop sharing, Sherry, so you can take back.
Okay. So then I wanted to use a fantastic example in PowerPoint. I'll be honest with you. I think both Richard and I were very surprised at how well, again, it makes sense when you think about it, but PowerPoint has the most robust of them all. You know, that, sorry, I have to decide here which screen. It's the one with Richard on it. And then I have to click share. Okay, perfect. So you all are seeing, I hope, my PowerPoint screen.
Yeah.
And this happens to be the PowerPoint presentation I was presenting from. So indeed it was, we took our DEG template and then Richard and I put these slides together. Julia gave us a few things. And so at the bottom of the screen in the status bar, we have our accessibility investigate, which will, in the same way that it did for Outlook with Richard, it's going to bring up on the right-hand side all of the accessibility errors that it sees. So one of them, well, I don't even know. Let's just start from the beginning. These happen to be all of the groups that do not have any kind of description whatsoever, to Richard's point. What's cool is that you can go ahead and launch the features right here in the task pane, the features to enable this. So we'll say, Richard, before the pandemic. This was his picture he took right before the pandemic. And so we can put in our alternate text and then go back and we can keep working through this list. Another thing that it will find, and you know, this has always been just a navigation issue that I've noticed in PowerPoint presentations all the time, which is that in outline view, we don't have in certain of our slides, even because of some of our layouts, we don't have a slide title. And because there is no slide title, those who are using whether screen readers or trying to navigate, this absence of navigation makes it difficult for anyone to kind of understand how this thing is laid out. So what we can do once again is we can use the drop down to go ahead and add a slide title, add a hidden one, you know, set something as a slide title. So I could, if I wanted to, I could set that quote as the slide title. And so again, you get this very thorough, interactive kind of tool to make these accommodations and set that out. I also thought that this was a brilliant one. The fact that we have had sections that we can name in PowerPoint, where the heck are those in Word? I'd love to know, but in any event, this, you know, I never even named or even applied sections in here, which would group concepts throughout. So these are all things that really I didn't do as we were creating this, that I should be doing. Now I want to jump to something. Richard showed you the aspects of accessibility in his Outlook message where it was hard to read because of the contrasts, right? But what I want to show you is this one, which is the reading order. Now, when someone is using a screen reader, what has to happen, and if you think about any sort of, I guess I want to call it sophisticated layout, something that isn't just words on a page, right? There has to be, when it's sort of splattered all over the slide like this, we notice it, you all, in animating objects within PowerPoint. But in a screen reader, if it's going to read back to someone what this is, you're going to have some kind of reading order. And so establishing what is that order, and writing it, you know, these are really important aspects of setting that, again, for multiple purposes, and verifying the order of these objects on this slide. Really, it's ordering only by when you create it. Like, here's what I put in first, here's what I put in second. And we also know that we're not doing that in a linear fashion. I might now start trying to do that in a linear fashion, and then I'll have the order already in place. But sometimes that isn't reality. And so what we can do is we can check the reading order and we can reorganize it. We can drop down this list and verify that object order. You've all done this if you've created a dialog box, for example. What's the tabbing order? It's very, very similar to that. And then, oh dear, I have a duplicate slide title. And that probably was just because I did duplicate the slide and I didn't edit the actual title of it. But again, these are the kinds of things that the inspector shows. And as I said, I think of all of the accessibility tools, and in fact, accessibility focus and attention within PowerPoint, it's significant, and that makes sense, right? Because we're using PowerPoint as almost a multimedia tool. And again, it just means that the accessibility for people trying to consume it with those inabilities, honestly, we've not made it easy for them. So that was PowerPoint. Now in Word, we're going to kind of use Word as a way to show also Acrobat's similar tools. This was a document that we put together to try to illustrate, you know, as much inaccessibility as we could. I will say it's easier to create good documents than it is to create wrong ones. Nonetheless, we can use the accessibility checker inspector within Word. And again, remember, these are all Office 365 tools that I'm showing you. Once again, there were multiple pictures that we have in here that do not have a description. It will take me to either add a description, or this item right here, for example, I can mark it as decorative. So it's not necessarily something a screen reader would need to read.
And Sherry, I think that was one of the most helpful things that I learned going through this pretend document. And we did this by using a building block, a built-in building block that we just use for our title page. And being able to set something as decorative brings up two issues. Yes, we don't want it to clutter the read back by saying, oh, this is a curly Q leafy image. Why do we use it anyhow?
Right. Good,
I mean, I think
point.
that becomes an internal debate that we can all have as we create our documents.
I also found it fascinating. This was a learning I did not have until we did this, Richard, was that anytime you are setting a object such as a text box, with wrapping that is not in line, you have an accessibility error. And so just taking this and, you know, making it in line with text, which of course now moves it up, we'd have to do some manipulation, obviously, to get it to lay back at the bottom of the page. But that whole inline objects that again is the requirement for accessibility. And then we
And I
did also.
believe that's
Go ahead.
because screen readers only want to read inline text. Isn't that
Right.
the issue there, Sherry?
I believe so, yes.
Yes.
And we have a couple of folks on the call who can also address some additional questions. So these are just, call it headings or, text that's been called out that is hard to read. And I thought you all would be very interested in this one. Sorry, I got to go back. I thought you all would be interested in this one because check this out. What it is that our text is in white, but our fill is also white. And so because of that, you really, you can't read it. And so I wanted to point that out because these kinds of, I don't know, obscured items are also something that it will take you to, navigate you to, and allow you to modify, various actions that will fix it. In this case, I think it's really just best that what we do is we apply the right table design. And honestly, we found that many, if not, the ones we tried out anyway, many of these table designs actually did help accessibility. It's when what we were doing was manipulating them one-off that they weren't so accessible. So in any case, hopefully that all gives you some good context. And that was Word. So then what we did, because we wanted to find, the end game, right? This is going to be a PDF that goes on a web page. Is what we did is I used this, the integrated export to create a PDF. So like Julia Childs, I already baked the cake. And here is the accessibility tool having been run on our document. And you'll notice that, it tells you all the tests that it performs and whether it's passed. By the way that I launched this, I'm thinking that I really do want to kind of show you how I launched it. I am positive this is on some sort of toolbar. However, my way of doing it was to search and launch the accessibility check. And then it brings up the checker options. This is the whole list. And I had it check everything just because I wanted to just be thorough. And so I had it go ahead and start checking. I'm going to replace the attached reports and we're going to have it generate, the new one. And here you'll see all of the tests that it ran. You'll also see that the logical reading order needs a kind of manual check. So it's something you need to investigate. It also knows that the title fails. And I believe that's because, see, that's the thing. I'm not certain exactly how, yeah, there we go. On the right click, explain, it will take you to Adobe's site to verify, some of these items and what the indicators actually mean. So there is, again, it's very robust, and what it is it's very detailed. And so this page should give you some good context for some of those. You can, I think, choose to fix it, and then of course as you go through you can check again, so you've got a new report you can work through. And so forth. And then where was it we saw the text issues? I am really hopeful that Richard and I can find this for you because it was kind of interesting.
It was, and it seemed like it was more obvious when we were going through this last night.
It was in our very original document. Let me just kind of point you all to what it turned up. So if we look at the character pair, that is F and T together and T and I together, what we found out was that these turned into ligature characters in Calibri once you did that and once you generated through the native PDF generator. And so when you make a ligature character, it's like one character made out of two,
Joined
and
together,
F and T, they're crossbars there, they meet. And then T and I, it was just kerned so closely that it pointed out the very discrete characters. Now, I wonder if what made the difference, I'll be honest, is that we had a kerning setting on our styles, and that's what caused it, we believe. But again, in this one, we seem to have solved the problem, shall we say, eliminated the evidence, so to speak. And so anyway, so that's where we are in accessibility within Acrobat.
How long is a piece of string? You don't know what they know as
Yep.
well.
So sorry. So in any case, those were the things that we wanted to just show and introduce you to. There's obviously lots more to know about this. But now I think what we want to do, Richard, is to go ahead and let me share the other screen where I will have the presentation and we can go on to kind of our open discussion.
Yes, and there's been some fantastic points made in our chat.
Ooh,
That
cool.
when we get a little further on, we can populate our list with. Yeah, but we want to know, what are people's experience with adding accessibility to digital documents? Is anybody doing this already? And I know that somebody
Yes.
spoke earlier. Was it Roz from Clifford was talking about that they're making their templates accessible, and that's a great thing. I think that's many firms have to start looking at this.
So Roz, are there some things that you can share about the process you all went through to do that? And I know you were mentioning kind of a next step you're taking with Adobe even.
So we've been looking at this for a little while now. Last year, probably at the beginning of last year, as part of our accessibility inclusion process. And we had already been using alt text as part of our, it wasn't so much at that time to do with screen readers, but when we were putting it up on the web for other people to read when you convert it into Adobe. So that was one of the reasons. And then we decided that because we do quite a lot of PowerPoint presentations, that it would make more sense for us, for example, our when we're doing pitching, we already have pictures or boxes in there that people are asked to fill in, and they don't know about the alt text. So we decided that we would put the alt text in as a reminder, and it says something like change the wording or put the name of the person. So you said on your one, you did Richard. What we tend to do is it's a screenshot of, so that those using screen readers are aware it's actually a little picture and it may not be as important, as opposed to something in a text box that they need to be clearer on what they're reading. We then went one stage further and created an accessibility guide, and it's mostly for PowerPoint because it's really PowerPoint that has all of these objects, if you like. It's much easier to correct Word because you can have your accessibility checker running at the bottom, and therefore that comes up going, don't use this, or you've used the wrong font or whatever. So it was mostly PowerPoint.
Roz, you mentioned PowerPoint, and I think that's something that once you think about it, it's so obvious, is that PowerPoint is all about presenting information. Whereas
it's also
documents,
about boxes. It's all about text. I mean, there's no straight writing in PowerPoint.
Exactly.
You have to put it in a text box or a drawing box, whereas Word is a typewriter. If we go back to the old days, it's still a typewriter. But PowerPoint is not. And when you put it back up onto your websites, it's displayed completely differently. And that was what we needed to ensure that our external clients were reading some of our papers in the right way and that we were being accessible.
And Roz, you know, one thing that we noticed about the PowerPoint checker is that you all may know that when you put an image in, there's actually a setting in PowerPoint that says it will try to auto-generate an alternate text caption inside, right? And what's neat about the PowerPoint checker is any auto-generated alternate text is flagged in the checker. So that means if you haven't, you know, adapted it, so to speak, it can pick up whether it's missing or whether it was auto-generated and obviously isn't validated.
Yes, and we are trying to get people to actually put something in that is relevant to what they have put in. So we're trying to say, please don't let it the auto generation, please don't let the decorative text be what goes in that alt text box, because it's irrelevant. It doesn't mean anything to somebody who's using a screen reader. It's totally unfair. And one of our partially sighted guys who's on our Enable committee, he came up with a statement that he wants his colleagues to be able to work, those that have a disability, he wants them to be able to work in the same way an able body works every day. And that was the statement last year, and that really, you know, we took that to heart, that, you know, just because you are different doesn't mean you need to be different. And therefore we have to provide everything in the way of our documents, in the way of your screens, etc., that you are not pushed to one side and having to work in a different way, slower, faster, whatever, to anybody else in the office.
Very good. Yeah. Sherry, one of the things we were thinking about doing as we moved on with this roundtable discussion is talking about what we can do as an organization as we move forward, and asking really what Roz has introduced to us, what our members are doing. So do we want to move on to that, sort of creating a bullet list now that we've got the conversation going?
Absolutely, we can. We did put a bunch of questions in here just to kind of spike the conversation. I don't think we may need to do that. But,
well, the second question was something that I think applies to this part of the conversation, and that is, who is going to, quote, carry the mantle in your organization for accessibility? We heard Julia talk about Latera and how they are moving forward the discussion there. We've heard Roz talk about that, but I think we all need to think about, are we in this conversation, of the 30, 40 of us that are in this call right now, are we the people that go back to our organization and say, let's do this? Do we individually carry the mantle? Do we go to our HR group? Do we go to our technology group and say, what are we doing about this? Maybe we are the catalysts.
Yeah, and I think it's again, we kind of divided this up, rightly or wrongly, about what should the DEG be doing as an organization. So is our template accessible? Could be a first step. You know, do we have anything on our in our knowledge base that talks about adding accessibility? And if not, you know, we definitely need to develop some. And then finally, like, what are the steps that you might want to take with your organizations? And
well, one of the items that came up in the chat, Sherry, I think it points to us in the DEG directly, and that is, we did not have closed captioning turned on for this presentation. Maybe our future roundtable discussions, we need to have closed captions automatically appear and not have it be an afterthought. You know, maybe that becomes part of our initiatives. Closed captions for all presentations.
I love it.
Yeah. And are any of your organizations doing that already?
Yes, we are. Closed captions is absolutely necessary when running Teams and when running WebEx for external clients.
Hanek, I don't know if I'm saying your name correctly from I Train Legal. I'm sorry that I don't know how to pronounce your name. It's embarrassing. But you just put that forward as that's part of your checklist, right? And you're welcome to unmute if you would like to share that with us. Ah, Hanukkah.
As soon as I figure out how to unmute myself.
Oh, there you go. Now you're unmuted. Thank you, Hanukkah.
Yeah, I think you know the alt text is one of the aspects of accessibility. So I think rather than just showing alt text in training, showing them the accessibility checker, which is right there with the spell checker and should also be at the end of your presentation when you've built the whole thing. Do your spell checker, do your accessibility checker. I think that's I think that should just be good practice.
And would you do the same thing, I think, in Acrobat as well, or your PDF producer?
You know what, I haven't trained PDFs since I've become more accessibility minded. But I think it's definitely a I do like to include checklists in my training at the end. Like how do you make a good, or what makes a good Word document, what makes a good PowerPoint presentation? Check. And I think that makes it easier for people to remember as well. I read this weird statistic once about intensive care units where they introduced checklists, which then reduced their errors by 80+%, something ridiculous like that. So giving your learners a checklist for things that they should check their documents for is definitely something that I like to include in training.
And maybe that's something we develop, Sherry, is a checklist for.
I've just thrown that in there. By the way, you've also reminded me, Hanukkah, about what Roz was saying. So one thing that's interesting is that I think you all saw it. We had accessibility checker in Word, and granted, we didn't fix everything. But what we did then is we produced a PDF out of it. And the two lists, right, basically tell you that you have to fix things at both. In both. And so again, Roz, you were mentioning about talking with Adobe about, you know, how can we not have to do this twice? And so again, I'm just floating an idea here. What if the Document Excellence Group, representing as many firms as we have members in, what if the Document Excellence Group wrote letters to Microsoft and to Adobe and basically said, hey, can you get your checkers in alignment? You know, something that shows the power of this group that could hopefully move it forward. And again, or augment what each of you may be doing with those organizations. So we don't have to do, it's not so much double this work, but really just making it be an aligned process that can be baked into the authoring side and the publishing side.
Yeah, I am very excited about the path this conversation is taking, because it truly is revolutionary. I mean, we are talking about changing the way our firms present our data, present our information, do our presentations, and not only in the way that we service our clients, but in the way that we service our staff. You know, as Roz was mentioning earlier, I think this is really a key to the fundamental change that needs to take place in every industry. And let's start with ours. Let's start with the document industry.
again,
Loving some resources that are showing up on the task pane as well. Thank you for sharing them. Things like
Yes.
Accessibility Made Easy to post. Hanneke, thanks for that. And Kathy, the Canadian National Institute for the Blind, has some great guidance.
I'm
So-
going to put those links on this slide. So,
Yes.
I'll grab those out of the chat in a minute. I'll put that so that we can publish this. By the way, before we share it with you all, I'll correct all the accessibility
Yep.
issues.
But I think
again,
we
the
can maybe put some
intention-
of them on the website as well,
we
which we probably should
intentionally
review.
left, we
similarly.
intentionally left them there, right?
Yeah.
So, yes, the Doug should check its website.
Mm.
You
Yeah.
did get your links right from what I've learned about accessibility. Like you did give the description, not the www.
Right. Yes.
You know that is also a new thing in Office. So
It pastes them automatically, doesn't it? It's
it
beautiful.
does.
Mhm.
Completely a new thing, which I don't know, one could possibly surmise is because it was the accessible thing you needed to do.
The Atlassian products also do it. That's Jira and Confluence, which are now very popular in law firms and software development companies. They automatically do that with our links, which is wonderful.
Control K is the keyboard shortcut for inserting a link into text, if anyone cares. I use that one all the time now, and it pretty much works in any Office application. Sorry.
Perfect. Thank you.
No, that's okay.
That's
So,
wonderful.
I think that Julia might still be here, but Julia, what should someone in an organization, like the sort of steps, right? I'm feeling like we might want to provide, like, how do you go to, like Roz did, to her enable organization and indicate that, this needed to be done. What's a good set of steps that our members could do within their organizations?
Right. I think the responsive and reactive is really important. So when you have somebody that has a need or we're seeing a gap, responding right away and saying, how do I get to this? Or how can I get that to you? Is really important. They have to think about someone who comes to you. That's creating psychological safety. If I have the ability to go to talk to somebody or if they put up their hand and they say, listen, I'm attending, but I'm going to say that I really need this. I'm going to put that on right now. Before I take time to go through the whole rigmarole or process, I have to listen to what they need. That's really important. And then number 2 is being more strategic and proactive. So this inspired me. Which I'm trying to do in general with DNI is to centralize, because it's not that different people aren't caring about DNI in different roles, but as a leader is saying, so I need to centralize a bit. And what does that mean? I just put on, based on this, I wish I could say I'm all that in a bag of chips, but I'm not, is based on being inspired here was that I'm going to get marketing, IT, who we've done some stuff, DNI, Sherry, and I created a document just now and said, let's list everything we do have. That's the other thing, is a lot of people are like, oh my gosh, it's going to be a big deal. Look how much you guys are sharing here. What I'm saying is, well, what do we have that's accessible now for either
Such a
audio,
great
visual?
idea.
Yeah, you saw it. And let's make a list of that, because what I want to do is turn it into a guide. So people may not even come forward because they don't have psychological safety. They don't require an accommodation, but they do require help, and say, let's have this accessibility out for everyone of just what we currently have. Because I did not realize, between even me and Sherry, how much maybe Sherry didn't know and that she knows. So that's what I would do, is next steps. What do we have available? And let's get all these stakeholders together and get an accessibility guide out. Did you know you could use this? Or for leaders, I'll say this one more time, mid-managers in every company I've ever been in always need support on how to be a greater leader. It's not their fault at times. You could be a fantastic performer, just not have the experience or the wisdom to do so. So here is something, and say, even if you don't know, because somebody may not tell you, offer this in your team meetings, put this on your SharePoint site. You look great, but you're giving an accessibility to someone that just says, I don't really feel like telling you I have it, but I may go and access that. So that's what I've been that's my last tools to throw out there that I would suggest, that I'm also taking the advice of.
I think there's definitely an awareness that needs to be raised for lots of firms. We have digital signage here in London, and in my head now I'm thinking maybe I should produce a slide that we put on our digital signage to raise the awareness, and people start thinking about it themselves. Everyone, maybe.
Yeah.
I love this, advocating for other people, because we might not feel awkward raising it on their behalf, but they might feel self-conscious.
That's a very good point, is that there may be people in our organizations who don't feel comfortable going forward with that need. And we as technologists know the need exists. Perhaps it really is our responsibility to further the conversation in our, in our organizations.
Yeah. I also posted on the chat, but also share out the option of the guide that you have in every new hire orientation.
Mhm.
Yes.
Yeah, this is one of those things, I think, where technology and technologists and human resource experts need to come together.
I have to say, and Roz, this is directly to you and to Clifford Chance, but I have seen, oh, good grief, hundreds of PowerPoint style guides. I have never once seen a section in it about accessibility.
I think that needs to be built in, though, as long as your template is accessible. So making sure that your theme colors are there. Century Gothic is actually one of the fonts that is listed as being an accessible font, despite the question mark that Kathy mentioned, that Kathy pointed out. But having that built in, making sure that your light slide backgrounds aren't completely white, that you don't have like one of those faded images as your background, because that can cause problems with people. So having that built in, and then obviously making sure that you train people on how to use it is important. There's a lot that I think we can build in, so we don't have to think about it so much. And which is why I think Microsoft products are beautiful, because they do have a lot of built-in accessibility options. For example, on the immersive screen reader, I think that's on the view. If you go to the view tab on PowerPoint, there's is it on PowerPoint as well, an immersive reader, or is that only available on it might be the reading view?
So if we go to reading view, I
know it's available on Word and Outlook, and it just makes it like really easy for people to read. Immersive reader, another one to Google, perhaps. But yeah, there's a lot that's built in, and we need to make the templates accessible, I think.
And I think that we're sort of, well, we're over time. I'm loving this conversation. I want to keep going, but I think we need to probably wrap up here and say that this is a topic that we need to revisit. You know, let's have another session with the DEG discussing accessibility. I'm certainly going to put it on the table for our next meeting. And I'm so grateful that we covered so many topics. Ange?
Yes, I think that's an excellent idea. As with our last session, it seems there's so much question and so much discussions going on. I think we can definitely take this forward into another session and consider how we can help our community help.
Oh my goodness, Jamie, I'm loving what Jamie just wrote. Perhaps we could have an accessible version of the DEG styles.
Good call, Jamie. Well, one of
you,
the things I
Ellen.
read when I was reading finding out about screen readers was that it makes a noise for every paragraph return. So having multiple paragraph returns is not necessarily an accessible thing. And how delighted was I on behalf of all document production fanatics
I
out
love it.
there that the extra paragraph marks are not particularly helpful. Anyway, this kind of thing we can take forward. I'm sure we could all keep talking for quite a long time about this. I want to thank everyone who's been involved today, all of you who joined, everyone who's been involved in the chat, those that we picked on to talk. Thank you, Roz. Thank you, Hanneke, for joining in. Anyone else I've forgotten? To Richard and Sherry for steering this and making this happen. And of course, to Julia for taking the time to join us. She's not part of the DEG committee yet, but you know, we could work on her. And Millbank for once again hosting our Zoom session. We do appreciate it.